Following an interview in January where Mike Judge and Greg Daniels suggested that King of the Hill would be making a surprise return to our screens, speculation has been rife as to what exactly this new series will look like. The very first video I ever made on this channel was about the King of the Hill series finale, To Sirloin with Love, and how I personally felt that it was the perfect way to end the show's 13-year run. And so the news that the show is most likely returning left me, and possibly many others, with mixed feelings. On the one hand, the idea of getting to see new episodes of King of the Hill is really exciting, and yet there's always the fear that bringing back King of the Hill, a show which never really felt like it outstayed its welcome and bowed out in such a perfectly understated way, will have a negative impact on the show's legacy. The biggest news regarding the show's reboot came from former writer Brent Forrester, who revealed that current plans are for the show to be set 15 years into the future from when the show's original run ended. Personally, I find this dynamic incredibly interesting. In that original video, I suggested that one of the best aspects of the ending to King of the Hill was the way that it gave just a glimpse into what the future might look like for the Hill family and their neighbours. However, if a new series is actually set 15 years on, then I guess we'll get to see how that future actually pans out. So let's take a look at where each character's story arc was at when King of the Hill finished its original run, and what their future might look like in a new series.
Well, I did have a prior engagement, but I can always tape it.
Let's start with the Hill family. When we left the Hills, Hank and Peggy were 45 and 46 years old respectively, while Bobby was 13 years old and still at Tom Landry Middle School. If the characters are aged 15 years, that would leave Hank and Peggy in their early 60s and Bobby in his late 20s. Throughout the show's original run, Hank and Peggy always appeared to have, in their own way, quite a happy marriage, and you would expect that to still be the case in a new series. Peggy held a number of jobs during her time, including as a substitute Spanish teacher, a freelance writer for the Ireland Bystander, and later as a real estate agent. She was always quite a driven individual, so it will be interesting to see if she's added any new vocations to her CV in the future, or indeed how many more Substitute Teacher of the Year awards she managed to accumulate.
Oh yeah!
Hank held the same position as assistant manager at Strickland Propane for the show's entire run, where he was a loyal employee to manager and owner Buck Strickland. A new series being set 15 years into the future would mean Strickland would be into his 80s, and you would presume either retired or passed away. The fact that Hank always remained assistant manager at Strickland Propane became something of a running joke on the show, so it would be interesting to see if Hank is now manager of the company, or indeed if the company still exists. Perhaps the end of Strickland Propane will have seen Hank go into business himself, selling the product he feels so passionately about. The time lapse would mean that Bobby is now 28 years old and presumably no longer living at the Hills family home. It'll be interesting to see how this change in dynamics affects things at the Hill house, with Hank and Peggy now living alone, and Peggy perhaps suffering from empty nest syndrome with her baby boy no longer living there. Bobby's ambition in life was always to be an entertainer using prop comedy, and personally I'd love to see if this dream came true. Or perhaps the new series would be a chance to show Bobby finally realising his dream. You would imagine that this would require Bobby to be living in a major city, which could perhaps require the series to expand beyond the boundaries of Ireland, Texas. And Bobby is deep down a Texas boy, so it would be interesting to see how he copes living so far away from home. And what about the relationship between Bobby and Hank, which was such a focal point of the original series? Going back to that video about the show's series finale, I mentioned how the episode managed to give just a glimpse into the future of the father-son relationship, with the two having found a shared interest in meat examination. Hank and Bobby are in many ways very different people, which always led to the pair having a somewhat awkward relationship. However, with the two finding a shared interest and some common ground, the series finale just felt like a perfect way to end the show. Obviously, messing with that series finale is always going to be a risk. However, if the show is to return, it begs the question, what will the relationship be like 15 years down the road? Personally, I always found episodes that focused on Hank and Bobby's awkward relationship some of the best of the show. And if there is a revival, I'd love to see how Bobby's relationship with his dad has evolved now that he's an adult, or possibly even a dad himself. Adding the dynamic of Bobby dealing with parenthood could be really interesting, as could the idea of Hank and Peggy being grandparents. Moving next door, there's also the question of what life will look like for the Gribble family. At the series finale, Dale and Nancy appear happy in their marriage, with Nancy having finished her long-time affair with John Redcorn a number of years previously. However, considering John Redcorn is secretly Joseph's biological father, it would be interesting to see if he still has any type of contact with the Gribble family and Joseph, who would now be a full-grown man himself, and if anything would resemble John Redcorn even more. Although that's something that's still unlikely to register with Dale.
I may not be a licensed New Age healer, but I think I've walked in on you guys often enough to know what goes on in there.
Speaking of Dale, given the new series would most likely be set in the present day, it would be very interesting to see what way the show's creators would apply this to Dale, one of television's most recognizable conspiracy theorists.
Oh, in that case, my name is Rusty Shackelford.
Boomhauer was a swinging bachelor for the majority of King of the Hill's run, and you would assume he will still have a similar lifestyle 15 years on. It was always unknown what exactly Boomhauer done for a living, and during the season finale it was revealed that he was in fact a Texas Ranger, so it will be interesting to see if that plays a part in any potential storylines in the new series. For me personally, one of the only flaws with King of the Hill's original series finale was the lack of any closure for Bill Doltrieve. Rumour has it that there was originally a short scene of Bill throwing his and Lenore's wedding cake into the bin, symbolising his ability to finally move on with his life after so many years of pining after his estranged wife. But it was cut for time. I always thought that was a shame, as it might be good to see Bill having managed to move on to the next stage of his life. Having said that, maybe Bill is just one of them characters who are destined to be unhappy, that a happy Bill Doltrieve just wouldn't be Bill. And what about the neighbours on the other side of the hills, the Supernussimpones? At this stage, Connie will most likely have graduated from college and be living elsewhere. And given the fact that Con was never particularly fond of his neighbours, it'll be interesting to see if him and Min have decided to stay on Rainy Street or if they've decided to move elsewhere. Sadly, the voice actors of both Luann and Lucky have passed away since the show finished, and you would guess that it's unlikely the creators will continue to use the characters without Brittany Murphy and Tom Petty. Perhaps the characters will just remain off screen, or maybe their absence could be explained by the couple having relocated to a different city. Of course, one of the show's best known characters, Cotton Hill, passed away during the season 12 episode, Death Picks Cotton. However, the following season still managed to have a Cotton-centred episode where Hank had the duty of performing a list of Cotton's last wishes. This is strictly personal preference, but I'd love to see another episode where Cotton's presence is felt on screen. This could possibly be incorporated into a plot involving Cotton's youngest son, Good Hank. A baby when the original series finished, but now a teenager 15 years on. Perhaps the teenage Good Hank could approach the Hills hoping to find out more about the type of man his father was.
Diddy woman, hurry up with my bags!
There's no question that bringing back a show that's been finished for so long is always going to be a risk, especially a show so highly regarded as King of the Hill. It means that the show's original ending is, well, no longer the ending, and therefore I guess you just hope that a new series will do the show justice and maintain all of the characteristics that made King of the Hill so great in the first place. And it has to be said, quotes from show creators Mike Judge and Greg Daniels all sound really encouraging. I really don't think that bringing back King of the Hill is something that Judge and Daniels would do unless they really believed in the idea, and felt that it was a project that would further the show's reputation. And so for now, I guess it's just a matter of waiting for news on when it'll be time to drop back into Rainy Street, Ireland, and see what life is now like for the Hill family and their neighbours.